Welcome, everyone, to Zoom Into Books today. We have international multi-award winning author Don Helin. Don writes military thrillers and he lives in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He's very active with pen writers, and Don does a lot of speaking engagements. Today, he's going to be talking about his Zack Kelly series of military thrillers. So, Don, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy, and hi everybody. I wanted to thank Kathy because the fall always the time to start doing book signings, and I'll be doing one next week with my all my friends here at Willow Valley, and we'll be doing some with Perry County, and we'll be doing some with the libraries in Lancaster. And it helps me a lot because people say, well, tell me about this book or that book. And I can refer them to my website, which is www.donheelan.com, or better yet, I refer them to Zoom in the Books. And there I'm telling them a little bit about the different books. So Kathy was very good about putting together two of these Zoom in the Books. Now, the first one, we went up through my suspense novel, Missing. And what I'd like to do today is kind of move on from there and touch base briefly with each of the other books. But just a quick reminder, many of you know I was a career officer in the military. And when I got out, I said, well, what now? Not a big demand for a guy that's pretty good at writing Army regulations. And so I was fortunate that I spotted that the Washington Post was doing a travel writing symposium. And I thought, boy, Elaine and I like to travel. That would probably work. And I did that for only 7 years, almost 7 years. And you know what I found is the purpose of a travel article is to bring your reader to want to go to that place. So that's really kind of a technique that I've learned. And when I started writing novels, I wanted to bring my reader into that novel so they enjoyed it and they wanted to read it. And that's just a technique that I keep working on and I keep using. And then I was really lucky because I joined International Thriller Writers and we had what's called a debut author program. And one of my mentors was Lee Childs. And I had debated that I wanted to do a series character. And I talked to Lee, who has a very famous series character in his books. And I thought, I'd really like mine. And Lee said, well, what do you, we'll give it a try. And I did. And my hero, Zack Kelly, is in every one of those books. And I've learned to really like the guy. And he's got a small group that works for the president's national security advisor. And oh man, they get in all kinds of trouble. And so far, I've been able to pull them out. Now, last time we talked about Devil's Den, which takes you to Gettysburg. Secret Assault goes back to when I was in Vietnam. Angel's Revenge, that takes you into a plot to steal a bomb. Long Walk Home takes you up to Washington, D.C. And Roof of the World, which is one of my, I really enjoy. Elaine and I took a trip to Tibet, Bhutan, and Nepal. And I put Zach into the story, and he was trying to help the people of Tibet who are just being dumped on by the Chinese. And so, of course, poor old Zach got in all kinds of trouble, but he made it through okay. So those were the five that we talked about in our last time. Missing is where we kind of ended. And this was interesting. The timing couldn't have been better because it was released in 2020. Of course, that was the presidential election, which I'll have to say, And I really don't care what side you're on. I don't care who you like. I just want you to enjoy my books. But we used artificial intelligence to cook the books and try to steal the election. And do you know that my friends here at the newspaper in Lancaster took that and they said, "Wow, that is just exactly what's going on." And we found out that that really worked, and missing could not have better timed. Then I think the next one is twins. And what I found is that there are two forces that are paralleling in twins. One are the militias, and many of you know some of it's died down, but there still are a lot of militias here. And I thought, what could happen if the militias got together with the French operatives in Quebec? Elaine and I, in our travels, we went up and spent time in Quebec. And then I did a lot of reading on France. And you know that the very right wing groups in France are still very strong. And so I thought, well, what do you say we put together the militias here in the United States with these French operatives and see what trouble they can get into? And they almost did get into a lot of trouble. But fortunately, I think it all worked out. But that's the story of twins. Now, the next book that I really enjoyed was, during my time in the military, the problem with drugs in Afghanistan got to be a huge problem. And we stopped, the drugs that they have in Afghanistan, they grow those little that they make into narcotics. And so we decided, hey, why don't we pay the farmers to quit growing those? Then we won't have that big a problem. But of course, it just worked the other way. And rather than not, they just grew more so they could make more money. And then at the same time, there was an exciting thing going on in Mexico where it turns out there's a lot of people that believe in the people from outer space. And I thought, well, maybe that's something we could bring in. And that's basically the story of buried relics. Now, the last one that is out right now is Toxic Pulpit. And I owe a lot to my grandson who came up to, I was in San Antonio, and he said, Grandpa, do you think Atlantis really existed? And boy, you talk about getting caught short. You know, I said, geez, I don't know. Well, I should have been ready because he gave me a stack of about 6 books. And he said, you ought to look through these. You don't have to read them all, but look through them. And the more I read, the possibility, I began to think, well, maybe there is something to that. And he said that they've now, and of course, the archaeologists are getting more talent all the time now. And there's a kind of a split that they feel that in archaeology, it may be that the history of our planet is on kind of thin stand, and that there may be a whole lot of new things that are going on. And it starts out with, a lot of people say, well, Atlantis that's a bunch of hooey. But, there's a fairly good proof now based on the findings of the rocks and the diamonds and nanodiamonds and all that, that there was a comet that hit North America about 12 centuries ago. And that comet could have certainly knocked out not only the primitive hunter-gatherers that we always hear about, but maybe a more advanced civilization. And I thought, now, okay, well, that's kind of a far reach. But then, as they continued to do research, were groups in Egypt, there were groups in the Mayan in Mexico, and then what's called the Mississippians, which are North America. These are three separate groups. And remember, this was 12 centuries ago. So how did they communicate? And we found that they all believed that when they died, they went up to came down on the Milky Way, and then at a certain time, it had to be right before dawn, they jumped to another planet. And it was all the same planets. And I said, now, wait a minute. Now, there's three civilizations, one in Egypt, one in the United States, one in North America, and one in Mexico. And they all believed that when they died, they went up on oh gosh, I've got a mental block on that but they went up and they did the same way in order to get to heaven. Now, how in the world could those three civilizations that far apart, that long ago, have exactly the same way of finding heaven? And that is what caused me to really begin to think about maybe there is something to that. And then I thought, well, let's suppose that there is something to that. What groups might end up not liking that? And there are certain groups that like history the way it is. And if there's any change to that, then there's a lot of problems. For example, Garden of Eden. Suppose that this new archaeology came up with there might not have been a Garden of Eden. Can you imagine what that would do? And so there's groups that are trying to put all this together. And that's kind of what Toxic Pulpit is all about. And I think you'll find that that can be a lot of fun to read, and it's very interesting. Now, as I finished up with my novels, I'm kind of pleased that I oftentimes get an idea for a novel by a trip I take, like my trip to Tibet, my trip to France, the trip to Ireland. And so Elaine and I took a trip to Newfoundland, the Canadian Maritime. And at the very tip of Newfoundland is Aux Meadows. And that's where the Vikings landed in the year 1000 AD, which is 400 years before Columbus is accredited with founding the founding of North America. And suppose that you were a Norwegian or Scandinavian and a big fan of the Vikings, and you look around and you see this other guy gets credit for what your people did. That might make you kind of interested and might make you angry. And that's kind of the whole story, and it's called the Viking Sagas. Now, the Vikings, between the year 900 and 1200, or 850 and 1150, they controlled much of the world, ranging from North America all the way to Russia. And so they have left their stories in sagas. They call them the Viking sagas. And so as I began to read that, I thought, this might be a pretty good story. So that's the next book that'll be coming out, and I hope to get that out in the spring if we can work that out. Now, Elaine and I moved from our home, just a little bit west of Harrisburg, to an over 55 community here in Lancaster. And when we got to Willow Valley, I started going around and I talked to different people. And the stories that these people have is absolutely incredible. One of my friends worked on is there life out on Mars, and he was the guy doing the research with the science. Another guy was escaped from East Germany in a kayak. Absolutely incredible stories. So I began to think, well, maybe we ought to tell some of those stories. And I happened to be talking to Kathy, my publisher, and I was telling her a little bit about those stories. And she said, Don, why don't you write that? And I'm like, oh, nobody's going to be interested in that. She said, no, give it a try. And I'll tell you, you have to pay attention to what your publisher tells you. Because my novel, From Army Regulations to Novels, A Writer's Journey, my memoir, won an award on the London Book Festival and another number of other places. And so I think you'll enjoy reading that because it starts out with my service in the United States, went to Germany, went to Vietnam, 10 years, 3 tours in the Pentagon. So it's really an interesting story. And then, the another memoir we got to be thinking about. I know in 2020, one day Elaine and I were sitting there and said, well, we better go to the store. And do you know, we were uneasy about going to the grocery store. Is it really safe? And so talked to Kathy, my publisher, and we put together stories about everybody's experiences during the pandemic. And we taught a couple classes on that. And then we she put out a call and I think got 34 or 36 different stories. And these were from physicians and nurses and teachers and children and educators and singers and put this together, Voices from the Pandemic. And basically, it's a memoir of what people found during those years. And I realized more and more, if somebody asks you where you were when Kennedy was shot or during 9/11, you know exactly what you were doing. During 9/11, it brings, we lived in Pennsylvania. And Elaine and I were drinking coffee out in the front porch, not paying any attention to the world. I got a call from my daughter, and she said, "Are you okay?" I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Get the TV on, Dad." And I did, and there the planes were coming in. So everybody knows where they were at a key time. And you know what you were doing, who your friends were, how things worked. And this is a great, uh, and I've sold a lot of these copies because people are interested, and who knows where we're going with the pandemic, who knows where we're going with any of this stuff, but it's interesting. And then my third, my third little memoir is that Elaine and I have always been dog people. And we had a wonderful dog. She found Max. She was out jogging one night in the country, one day in the country, and it was 29 degrees, freezing, slating, and she saw this little critter crawling along with its back legs behind him. And she grabbed him, and of course, he was shaking like a leaf and went back, took him home, and that was Max. Then, as they always do, 15 years later, little Max died. And I can't tell you how hard that was on Elaine and I, because we were dog people. We've been trained service dogs and all that sort of stuff. So I said, what is it that makes dogs so darn special? And found out that all of our family has dogs. So they all wrote articles about their dog. And so those books are all together. I want to thank Kathy for her time in letting me talk about this because, next week I'll be doing a book signing with all my friends here at Willow Valley, and people will be asking about what about this book? And boy, you got to be quick to to remember all this different stuff. And sometimes it's not easy as you kind of walk down the road. So I think what I can do is refer these to, and Kathy's put together a nice summary for me, and we've got the website. And so I can say, hey, just check out what my publisher put together and check out the website. And you can see, because a lot of people, it's not just for them, it's Christmas. And that's the nice thing about November, December. And they want to buy a book for Uncle Joe or Aunt Phoebe or whatever. And they want to buy a book that they think they will like, which means they don't want to know the whole story, but they want to know a little bit about it. Is this the sort of thing that they would enjoy? And I think those are the things that be very helpful to me as I start doing all of these signings. So again, it's right now we've got 10 books, 10 suspense novels. We've got 3 memoirs. And please, when I'm at a signing, or I know Kathy has mentioned to touch base, I'd be more than happy to come out and talk to you. I just did a nice talk to some of my friends at Willow Valley. They have a book group, and I'm always happy to do that. I'm certainly planning on going to Penn Writers and making presentations and stuff like that to help other people learn how to write. And what at Willow Valley now, we're we're starting to do a lot of AI research. And one of my friends is looking into avatars, and he wants me to talk about how to write a story so in case the time comes where you have an avatar that you know how to write your story. And it's not just write it, but it's fun and interesting for your family to read. Because if it reads like a library book, they're not going to want to read it. So Kathy, thank you. I think we've got the sum of a lot of what I'm trying to do here. And I don't know if there's a couple more things or any questions, but I think, I'd like to give some time for any questions or any other thoughts.
Well, Dawn, it was a great summary. All of Dawn books are page turners. I can assure you of that. We did have a question. They want to know what was your favorite book that you've written so far?
Oh boy. That it's like saying what's your favorite child or whatever. And there's not really a favorite, but I've always people say to me, what was your first book? I'd like to start at the beginning. And I will have to say that, I got a little corner of my heart that's for Devil's Den to a point that I know Kathy and I, we had to put together another printing of Devil's Den because it's a good book, and a lot of people want to get that first book. So it's not only a favorite, but it's certainly one of the top ones. And if you're going to start, I would recommend you might want to consider that one.
And I have posted your website in the comments on YouTube.
Yeah,
And if people buy a book from your website, will you personalize it for them?
I sure will. Anything that I can
That's the
do,
best part about
that's right.
ordering off the
I'm,
author's website.
I'm more than happy to
Absolutely.
do that.
Don's books are available from donhelin.com, headlinebooks.com, Amazon, stores everywhere. His ebooks are also available.
Right,
Don gets around. You do a lot of events and you do a lot of presentations and
right. And that it's really fun because it keeps me tuned in to what people
yes.
like somebody will say, well, gee, what I think one of the best examples in Devil's Den, there's a psychic medium who has a key part in there. And then that was the first book. In the second book, I was talking to people and they said, whatever happened to her? And that made me think. So in book four, she came back. So that's kind of, you get what people are interested in, and the whole thing is to try to react to your readers and give them what they're looking for. And that's what we try to do between the two of us.
Well, that's true. Don's also been a feature that every York City.
Yeah.
So Don's around. Please don't hesitate to contact him. And we also can do a book club discount for your book club on
Oh,
any
good.
of Don's books.
Yeah,
And then when you've read it, Don would be happy to do a virtual visit with you
sure.
and you guys can
Absolutely.
talk about the books.
I always love to talk about the books. So,
Yeah, we have a lot of book clubs that do that. That's very popular.
okay.
For coming on books.
Yeah, well, thank
This
you
is
again, Ken.
live.
But thank you, everybody. And I hope you all enjoyed our talk. And we hope to see you again soon.